Hi, students. We're in Unit 2, Freedom of Speech. It's week 4 now. And week 4 is all about the message or content of your speech. So, in terms of speech, we're talking about the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. It provides that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is right at the pinnacle. It's one of the most important rights that we have as citizens. It's important because it allows our citizens to criticize its government so change can come about. And just look what's going on in some of these cities now. I believe that these protesters have gone too far in a lot of cases, but I think that they do have the right to criticize the government so change can come about. What I disagree is that they don't have a right to commit acts of violence and damage to property. But also, freedom of speech is important because it allows grievances to be aired through public debate rather than violence. Political and social frustration can be diffused, although I'm not sure that that is happening now, and there can be advances in truth and knowledge made. It's very important for law enforcement officers to have a working knowledge of this important right because they deal with this every single day. Again, it's also important for you, even if you're not in law enforcement, to understand what your rights are so you can protect your rights. In terms of speech, we're not just talking about a person speaking or what you read. It's actually a lot larger concept than that. It's really all about who you are as a person. It's about your right to receive information, your right to hold beliefs, communicate to others in a variety of ways, engage in silence, engage in symbolic speech. So you have a right to receive information and hold your beliefs. And this is not just talking about political beliefs. It's talking about your belief in everything that you believe in, really. It could be music or art or sports, politics, really everything. It's really about who you are as a person. That's why this particular right is so important. Also, I think what's important about free speech is that you become a free thinker. You don't allow other people to tell you what to believe and what to think and what to say. And I think a lot of that is going on now. There are groups out there, if you do not think like them, if you do not believe what they believe in, if you talk and say something that is different from them, instead of having a debate about the issues, they will resort to violence. They will assault you. And I think that is just a way of control. It's actually uh, causing people not to speak. And I think that's the wrong thing to do. Free speech involves having a marketplace of ideas. That was said by one of the justices in an opinion. Free speech should be a marketplace of ideas where these ideas are discussed openly, and the best ideas should prevail. Unfortunately, that is sometimes not what we see. So I hope that you become a free thinker. I think I hope that receive information, you think about it, you form your own beliefs, and you know what you believe and why you believe them. Okay. So there's three categories of speech that this first segment, this first week, will talk about. There's pure speech, which is the message or the content. There's also symbolic speech, which is nonverbal conduct as a message. And then there's speech coupled with conduct. For example, people picketing or demonstrating. Typically, there's some sort of conduct like marching around, but there's also speech involved with it. I want to talk about the first category. That's what I call pure speech. And generally, laws or police action that restrict speech because of its content are invalid. So the message here is you cannot regulate pure speech, the message, the content. That's the general rule. You cannot do that. If there is a law or there's some sort of police action based on the content of the message, that's going to be very strictly construed. And the government is going to have to show a compelling reason in order to restrict speech just based on the message. So generally speaking, and need to understand is generally speaking, the message is protected. You have a right to say what you want to say. That being said, there are certain well-defined exceptions to that general rule, and I'm going to cover those now. One exception to that rule about the message is obscenity. The second is child pornography. Third is fighting words. Fourth is threats. And the last one is incitement to immediate unlawful action. These exceptions are narrow and well defined. Police cannot arrest people for the content of their speech unless it's going to fall within one of these 5 categories. So let's talk about obscenity. The test for obscenity is actually in a case called Miller versus California, the 1973 U.S. Supreme Court case. It is still the law today. And the Miller case defined a work as obscene if it meets these 3 criteria. It has to meet all 3 of them. One, and first, it has to appeal to the prurient interest of the average person. What does prurient interest mean? It means an abnormal interest in sex. I don't know if there is an abnormal interest in sex anymore, but it has to meet that first criteria. Secondly, it has to depict hardcore sexual acts defined by state law in a patently offensive way. So it has to be hardcore sex acts defined by the state. And third, as a whole, the work lacks serious literary, political, scientific, artistic, or other value. So it has to meet these 3 requirements. Pretty much, I don't know too much that would be considered to be obscene today. There was a case, it's a case, it was in the newspapers a few years ago now, it involved Abercrombie and Fitch. Abercrombie and Fitch is a store, they sell clothing items to, young adults, teens. They have an Abercrombie and Fitch, or they did in the mall in Fresno. The displays that they use typically are mannequins. The mannequins might have pants on them, but generally the top portion of the mannequin is unclothed. This case I'm talking to you about happened in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and there was an older lady. She was walking through the mall and she observed these mannequins and she called the police. The police responded and told the manager to remove them, and the manager refused. So they cited the manager for obscenity for having these mannequins without the tops of them being covered. So the question is, did these mannequins meet the test for obscenity in Miller, which I just went over you? Was there any prurient interest of the average person? In other words, abnormal sexual interest in these mannequins? No, I doubt that. Do they depict any hardcore sexual acts? No. And is there any value to these mannequins? Yes. It's not political, literary, but there's a value in marketing. They use those marketing. People walking by see them and they like what they see. They're going to enter the store and they're going to purchase items from the store. So in this particular case, they cited the manager for obscenity, the case went to the city attorney's office, and the city attorney dismissed the case and said basically that the facts of this case did not meet the requirements of Miller versus California. In other words, they were not obscene, and so the case was dismissed. So you do see that once in a while. So what if you're in law enforcement and if you received a call like that, how should you handle that? Well, if you knew the law, if you responded to that, you would tell the lady that no, it's not illegal, it's not obscene under law, and I'm not going to take any action, and that would be the end of it. You could tell the lady that she could call the corporation and complain. She could, talk to a representative and complain, but there's nothing from a law enforcement point of view that you could do. So that is obscenity. That's the first category that is an exception to the general rule that the message, you cannot regulate the message. So you can regulate obscenity, you can, but it has to meet the requirements under Miller, okay? The second category is child pornography. Child pornography is a category, it's a separate category from obscenity. You can regulate child pornography. The Miller Standard does not apply. The government may ban child pornography, but the work must depict real children engaged in sexual activity. So is child pornography a problem in the United States? Absolutely. It is a big problem. There are a lot of cases. It's illegal to possess it, illegal to distribute it. I just heard of a case of a young lady in the valley, I think down in Arosi, but she was distributing child porn, and she was indicted for that. There's a minimum federal time. I want to say it's like 5 years in federal prison for it. So it's taken serious. They even have task force in Fresno. It's a joint local, state, and federal task force, and they investigate cyber crimes, including child pornography. Typically, what they'll do is they'll enter chat rooms and pose as a child, and pursue leads from any contact. So anyway, so that's child porn. Those are two categories. These two can be regulated. Fighting words is a third category. Can you walk around challenging people to fight? No, you can't do that. That's illegal. In fact, in California, there's a penal code section that it's a misdemeanor that makes it a crime to fight or challenge someone to fight in a public place. So it's illegal. So fighting words are defined as abusive remarks and insults. So they have to be abusive remarks and insult. It has to be uttered in a face-to-face encounter under circumstances that are inherently likely to provoke an immediate violent response. So you really have to consider the context. So let's say if you're a police officer, respond to a call and someone's filing a complaint about these fighting words, you really have to be very careful when you investigate that. You have to get all the information. You have to understand the entire picture to get the context of it. Were these fighting words serious, or were they a joke? Were they fooling around? If you're fooling around and making a joke, is that illegal? No. But if you're seriously doing something like that, yes, it would be illegal. So officers really have to be careful, and they have to do a full investigation, interview everybody to determine the context that these words were spoken. So let me give you a few examples of non-fighting words. So in the Chablinsky case, the person called the marshal a goddamn racketeering fascist. Are those fighting words? No, they were not likely to provoke an immediate violent response. And that brings up an issue that comes up from time to time. And the issue is whether or not a police officer should be held to a higher standard regarding words directed towards them. Generally, it is assumed and correct that a police officer is held to higher standard. Why? Because officers are engaged in, diffusing situations. People are upset. They get upset with the officer. They start calling the officer names, and police officers just have to be trained to ignore that. I think that is sometimes easier said than done, especially if you're a young rookie versus an older officer. Young rookies tend to take things personally. I know I did when I started off as a police officer, and I just had to learn to ignore that. And in fact, what I used to do is just turn around on them and just agree with them. So if they called my mom a whore, I said, "Yeah, she's a whore." I mean, I just just agreed with them, and actually, instead of me getting mad, it made them mad. So as an officer, you have to just learn to ignore that. Sandul versus Larion was an interesting case. It was a case where there's some abortion protesters, and they were out on the sidewalk, and a car drove by. Someone leaned out the window, flipped them off, and yelled, "Fuck you." So were those fighting words? The court said no, they were not fighting words. Why? It just did not meet the test for fighting words. It wasn't. They were abusive remarks, that's for sure. Were they face to face? No, it was in a car driving by. Was it likely to provoke an immediate violent response? No, they're driving by. There's not going to be fighting or some kind of violent response to it. So they did not fall within the criteria of fighting words. Bufkins versus City of Omaha is a funny case. It was a case where a lady was suspected of bringing drugs into the city of Omaha in a bag. The officers were there. They asked her to go to their office so they can further investigation. She was not happy about it, but she went. She was grumbling. When they got to the office, they searched. She agreed. They didn't find anything, and they were letting her go. And they told her, "Have a nice day." Now, do you think they really meant for her to have a nice day? No, I don't think so. I think they were just being sarcastic. So she responded to them. She says, "I will, asshole." So you would think at that point it was a draw. The officer said something, he got in his little dig and she responded back, and, it's all even. Do you think that would be the end of it? But it wasn't the end of it. So what did the officer do? He decided to arrest her. He arrested her for fighting words. If he took this class, he would know that those were not fighting words, but that's what he did. The court said, no, these aren't fighting words, yeah, they might have been a little bit abusive, but, it's a face to face, but it's not likely to result in an immediate violent reaction. That's where an officer has to be a little bit tougher. The officer actually invited that kind of comment by the comment that he made to her in the first place. So, I've said that many times, honestly, have a nice day. And I was being a jerk, and if they were a jerk back, I say, okay, well, all right, we're even. See ya. What about giving the police officer the finger? Can you do that? Yeah, you can do that. It's not a fighting word. It's might be offensive. Generally, it's not gonna shouldn't it shouldn't invite a violent response by the officer. But is it a good thing to do? Do I advocate that you go around flipping police officers off? No, you're going to invite their attention. They're going to look at you more closely. It's surprising sometimes people, they say or do things towards officers when they're holding things they shouldn't be holding. That'd be holding a gun or dope, or maybe they have a warrant out for their arrest, or maybe they have a suspended driver's license. I don't know, but they're stupid because then they invite the attention of law enforcement, and they might not get any trouble for their behavior, but then they get in trouble for something that was collateral, the license or the warrant or holding the dope or a gun. It's just ridiculous, really. So those are examples of non-fighting words, but what would be a fighting word? A fighting word would be something like, hey, You're a fucking asshole. You're saying it right to their face, and I'm going to fucking kick your ass right now. And you put your fist up. Those would be fighting words. That's an example of it. You're in someone's face, it's face to face, you're being abusive, and it's most likely going to result in a violent response. And if you're talking to someone that was a minority and you insulted them about their race, do you think that's going to result in a violent response? Yeah, it will. Or you're talking about their mother or wife or their kids, and you're doing it face to face, you're being abusive. Yeah, those are fighting words, right? So that's I think the third category. The fourth category are threats. Can you threaten anybody? Can you go around threatening people? No, you can't do that. In California, it can be a felony. 422 of the Penal Code. It's a felony to make criminal threats. It's a wobbler, so it can be a misdemeanor. You can't go around threatening people. A threat is defined as a statement made by a person intending for it to be understood as a serious expression of their intent to commit an act of unlawful violence against another. It's a serious expression. You have a serious intent. Again, context is everything. I get a lot of cases involving these kids that are charged with threats. And what's the number one way that a kid would try to get out of a charge like that? What would the kid say? The kid would say, I wasn't serious. I was just joking. I was kidding. I didn't mean to threaten that guy. We're buddies, he just took it the wrong way, right? So context is everything. So an officer that responds to a call of a threat, they need to really look at the context. They need to look at the totality of the circumstances. They need to interview everybody, and they need to make a determination. Was this a serious expression of a threat, or was this something that was different? So anyway, that is a threat. The last category that I want to talk about is incitement to riot. So, legislatures have made advocacy of violence a crime if it's directed toward inciting immediate lawless action. It's likely to incite such action. And so those are the two requirements. It's directed toward inciting has to be immediate, lawless action, and it's likely to incite such action. So that would be like these protesters standing out there saying, yeah, burn that down, burn it down, throw the rocks, hurt that guy, beat him up, knock him down. So if you're out there and you're inciting this lawless action and it's likely to do that, and again, you're looking at context, then that would be illegal. So when you have people that are in a group and they're out there, can the officer arrest the person that is inciting the group to riot? Yes, you can do that, but the officer has to be able to establish that the speaker intends to incite. The unlawful action, is likely to occur, and the action is imminent. It's going to happen right now. So there's a couple of cases. I'll talk about one, and that's Hess versus Indiana, where the person said, "We'll take the fucking streets later." So this is a protest. People are in the street. Officers are moving them out of the street, and the guy says, "Hey, okay, we'll take the fucking street later." Is that incitement? Court said, no, it's not. The guy, he wasn't talking to anybody in particular. It wasn't actually telling anybody or advocating for other people to do anything unlawful. He's just responding to the cop. Hey, we're going to come back later after you're gone, and we're going to take this street. So that was not incitement to riot. So a couple other things I just want to mention. Is hate speech protected? Can you engage in hate speech? Yes, you can, unfortunately. There are people that will engage in hate speech. It expresses contempt for others because of race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation. So you have people that can express their viewpoint and be hateful, and they have a right to do that. It is legal. However, it can cross the line. That's where they have to be careful. It can cross the line into what? Fighting words. It can become, a threat. If it meets those definitions of something that is not protected, then they could be arrested for that, right? So, but hate speech in and of itself is protected. What about crude and vulgar speech? It's also protected. I've used some F words here, so that's protected speech. Um, but in some areas, it's not protected. So the areas where it's not protected generally are where kids are concerned. So you can't use crude and vulgar speech at school. You can't use crude and vulgar speech on the radio or television on programs during the time period where kids would most likely be listening. Even zoning laws can regulate the placement of businesses that involve the sale of crude or vulgar items, sex toys, magazines, things like that. Why they can regulate and keep them away from areas where kids might be exposed to them. For example, putting a business like I just explained to you next to a school. The city or county can enact zoning laws to prevent that from happening, and that is lawful. The last two categories I'm going to talk to you about are, so I'm getting away from speech as a message now. So I talked about pure speech, speech as a message. The general rule is that it is protected. You are free to say what you want unless what? It's in those five categories that I mentioned, right? Obscenity, child porn, fighting words, threat, incitement. Those are the five. Now I'm getting away from just the message to what we call symbolic speech and also nonverbal conduct. Well, let me change that. I'm going to talk to you about speech with conduct and symbolic speech, which is nonverbal conduct as a message. So, speech with conduct, for example, that is picketing, that is the handbilling, that is the marching and the chanting. So, you have a message coupled with some sort of conduct there. When you get into nonverbal conduct as a message, that would be like standing there, um, you're outside and you're not saying a word, you're just merely protesting, right? An example would be like burning a draft card back in the day. For example, during Vietnam, they had a draft. They were drafting people into the army to fight. You had a draft card. You had to have it. So to protest the draft, they would go to the government building, hold up their draft card, and burn it. A burning of a flag. If you just unfurled a flag, you were standing outside a government location, you're protesting, whatever you're protesting, you burn the flag. That's an example of nonverbal conduct. You're not saying anything, but you're sending a message. What if you had a Bible or a Quran, for example, and you stood outside some location in the public and you burned it? You were protesting something. You didn't say anything, you just burned it. There's a message there, right? So we're going to talk about those two different categories. And I'm going to combine them because the rule for these two categories is the same. So you have to separate out the message and the conduct. Can you regulate the message, do you think, based on what I just told you? No, you can't regulate their message. So if they're out there picketing and they're say they're advocating against uh, the war in Afghanistan, do they have a right to protest the war in Afghanistan? Yes. Can you regulate that message? No. What about if they're Black Lives Matter, for example? What's their message? Well, Black Lives Matter. They're against police brutality. That's my understanding of it briefly. But anyway, can you regulate their message? Do they have a right to get that message? Yes, yes, they do. What about burning the flag? Is there a message there? Well, usually flag burners are protesting a war, protesting some sort of government action. Can you regulate that message? No, you cannot regulate that message, right? The burning of the draft card, they're protesting the war. That's what they were burning. They're protesting the draft. Can you regulate that message? No. So in these two categories, you have to separate the message from the conduct. You can't regulate the message unless it's in one of those five narrow categories that I talked about, right? But can you regulate their conduct? Yes, you can. You can regulate the conduct if you can show that there's a substantial government interest that's unrelated to the message. So let's take a look at the uh, the marching and chanting. Now, if they're protesting, they're marching and chanting, and they're in the middle of the street and they're blocking the street, can you regulate the message? No, you can't. I just told you you can't. But can you regulate the conduct? So the question there is there a substantial government interest in keeping them from being in the street? Yes, I would submit, yes, there is. You have traffic. You have people that are going uh, on that particular road. They're going to and from work, to and from home, to and from getting the kids, going to doctors, dentists, whatever. But you know what? They have a right to use the street to get to where they need to go, right? And so the government has a substantial government interest in keeping the street open, right? Same with sidewalks. If they're blocking a sidewalk, can is there a sub can that well, first of all, can the message be regulated? No. Can their conduct be regulated? Well, you have to ask yourself, is there a substantial government interest in keeping people off the sidewalk? Sure. If they're on a sidewalk and they're in a business area and the sidewalk is used for customers to go into the businesses and out, into a bank and out, into a jewelry store and out, into a restaurant and out. That's how they get into those and out of those places, is by walking on the sidewalk. And if the sidewalks are blocked, then people cannot legitimately transact their business. So the government has a substantial government interest in keeping the sidewalk clear. So people can be arrested for blocking the sidewalk, blocking the buildings, right? So those are examples of that. What about, I mentioned burning a flag, burning the Bible, same thing. Do they have a right to protest against Christianity or Islam? Sure, they have a right to do that. That's their message. They don't believe in it. Is there anything wrong about their conduct, burning of the Quran or Bible? Well, not if it's their own. I mean, if I bought a Bible and I wanted to burn it and protest, or that would be perfectly fine. If I was burning somebody else's, that could be a malicious fire or arson or something along that line, right? But you have a right to do that, right? The burning of the draft card was an interesting case, actually. That was the U.S. versus O'Brien case. You should, I think that's in your book. You should read it. O'Brien burned his draft card to protest the Vietnam War. So was his message okay? Yeah, sure it was. He had a right to protest that. What about his conduct? What about the burning of the card itself? Did ask yourself, did the government have a substantial government interest in protecting the card from being burned? And the court said yes, because they looked at the draft, the purpose of the draft, having a draft card issued to the person, and they said the government had an interest in protecting the draft cards, and therefore it was illegal for him to burn it. Um, Roulette was the city of Seattle case where the lady, she was a homeless advocate passing out flyers, and she was actually sitting on the sidewalk in the business area. So was her message okay? Sure, it was okay. She's just supporting homeless folks, right? Was her conduct, was there a problem with that? Did the government have a substantial interest in keeping the sidewalk clear? Sure. So her conduct was actually illegal, right? So she did not have a right to sit there on the sidewalk, block the sidewalk, and do what she did. Her conduct could be regulated. So those are the rules. We talked about free speech, the message. We talked about general rules. You cannot regulate the message unless it's in one of those five categories. We talked about speech coupled with conduct, and we talked about nonverbal speech. And when you get into nonverbal speech and speech with conduct, you have to separate the speech from the conduct. You know the speech is going to be protected, most likely, unless it's in those 5, but most likely it's going to be protected, right? But then you have to look at the conduct and ask the question, is there a substantial government interest um, in regulating that conduct? And if there's a substantial government interest involved, then the government can regulate that conduct. They can stop that person from that activity at that location. So anyway, those are the rules. The next week we're going to cover free speech. Remember, it's these 2 weeks. The first part was the message. The next part we're going to talk about access to government property. So we're finishing up chapters 1 and 2. I want to just give you a heads up here. So when we're done with chapters 1 and 2, there's a study guide for your first test. The first test is actually on chapters 1 and 2. Use the study guide. I identified those areas on the study guide directly from the test that you're going to be taking. Then you're going to be taking the test. I'll tell you right now, the test is 30 questions. 5 of them are true, or 5 of them are extra credit, by the way. They're all true, false, multiple choice. You take the test, and then you'll be good to go into the next week's lesson. Okay, so that's all I have, and I will be talking to you later. Until then, take care, stay safe. All right, thanks.